Hey, it's Rich Eisen. I've done it all, from breaking the news of Mark McGuire's retirement to working with Scott Miller and his mustache on WJBC.
FM 102.1 and AM 1230 WJBC. This is the Scott Miller Show. My next guest is an Emmy Award winner. His voice is iconic due to the Chicago Bulls run in the 90s, from the Olympics and beyond. I'd like to welcome back to the show Mr. Bob Costas. Good morning, sir.
Hi, Scott. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much. You were all over television this weekend as you remembered Hall of Famer and your friend, Ryne Sandberg. Such a touching service. Before I get your thoughts on the service and Mr. Sandberg, as a man who has such an incredible love for the sport of baseball, what does it mean to you to speak at a service for a Hall of Fame player that I know you admire simply as a player in the sport you love so much?
Well, you know, one single day, June 23rd, 1984, connected us for more than 4 decades. It forged a connection and a friendship. Ryne always connected me to that game because I called it, along with the great Tony Kubek, on the NBC Game of the Week on that Saturday afternoon when he went 5 for 6 and hit the 2 last-ditch game-tying homers off Bruce Sutter in the 9th and the 10th. And that was one of the most amazing regular season games ever. There have been 3 documentaries made about it. What regular season game has a name? The Sandberg game, the signature game of an MVP season and a Hall of Fame career. And when his wife Margaret called me a few days after Ryne passed away and said that she'd like me to be one of the eulogists, well, of course, I was touched by that. And as you said, Scott, the ceremony itself was so moving and so filled with grace notes. His grandchildren stepping up and, depending upon their age, saying a little bit or a little bit less, because a 3 or 4-year-old still had something to say about his or her grandpa. All of it was just such a personification of what a decent guy Ryne Sandberg was. You know, when people say about anybody, an entertainer, a ball player, whatever it is, a great singer, a great ball player, and an even better person, that's usually an exaggeration and maybe ignores a lot of things that would undermine that case. But in the case of Ryne Sandberg, completely true. He was a genuinely gracious and kind person, a principled person, as well as being a Hall of Fame player.
I hung on every single one of your words in that eulogy, listening to you speak about June 23rd, 1984, the Sandberg game, your recollection of that game, a game that I did not watch. The way you painted that picture 41 years later, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. How many games like that do you have memorized from over the years? Because you spoke about it, I mean, hit for hit, base for base, like you were there the day of.
Well, there's some postseason games, some that I was lucky enough to broadcast, others that I just remember, including as a kid or as an adult. They may have been on another network, but I'm following it, a postseason baseball game, a World Series game, whatever. But there are very few regular season games that resonate to millions of people. Individually, we may have a recollection of our dad or mom taking us to a game or something that happened at a particular game that isn't really historic. But when you talk about historic regular season games, that's a much shorter list than historic postseason games. And the Sandberg game is at or near the top of that list.
How will you remember Ryne?
I'll remember him as a clearly Hall of Fame player, a player who was simultaneously spectacular at times, but fundamentally perfect. As I said in the eulogy, he was the kind of player that a dad or a youth baseball coach could point to and say, that's the way you play the game. And I quoted a passage from his Hall of Fame speech in 2005, where he talked about, you hit a home run, put your head down and run around the bases. The name on the front of the uniform is more important than the name on the back. That's respect. That's Ryne talking. That's respect. So I think that he made history without histrionics. There was his work, such as it is, his play spoke for itself. He was, I think, naturally somewhat shy and self-effacing, and that actually played to his advantage. There was nothing cynical about it. That was who he was. But I think that endeared him to people all the more, even in the 80s and 90s, let alone now when people celebrate a bloop single in the fourth inning.
We're on the phone with Bob Costas, and if that wasn't enough emotionally, you then headed up to Milwaukee to remember Bob Uecker this weekend. How will you remember Mr. Uecker?
With laughter and with tremendous fondness. He lived a longer life. He was only a week or 10 days shy of his 91st birthday, whereas it's tragic that Ryne was gone at age 65. Ueck was, even if he never said anything funny, he was a great radio baseball announcer. I think most people nationally don't understand that. They just remember him from Johnny Carson and from the Major League movies and the light beer commercials and all the rest. But he was a genuinely Hall of Fame level broadcaster and one of the funniest human beings who's ever lived. And not just judging him against other people in sports, professional comedians, many of them have said that he had the natural timing of a great stand-up comic. And being with him was always a joy because you're going to be laughing.
Mr. Costas, over the years, sports could be seen or heard in a few places. The Cubs on WGN, the Cardinals here on WJBC. But now sports, like all other forms of media, is spread out to so many, many outlets. Netflix, Amazon, apps. Yeah. Do you think this is helping or hurting sports viewership?
Well, if you can aggregate it collectively, I haven't seen all the data, it may help it, or it may help sustain it at a previous level before the media landscape changed. But almost nothing. The Super Bowl is an exception, and maybe if you get the right World Series matchup or the right matchup in the NBA Finals or March Madness, and certainly the Olympics once every couple of years, now that they've staggered it and the winter and summer are not in the same year. A few things cut through, but it doesn't feel like anything has the primacy that it once had. People aren't just getting it on different platforms live. They're consuming it on their phones in highlight form or whatever it may be. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that's one of the things that set the Sandberg game apart, as I tried to explain in the eulogy. The game of the week in 1984 meant something entirely different. If you were a baseball fan living in Montana, that was the one time you had a chance to see Fernando Valenzuela face Johnny Bench or whatever it might be. You didn't mow the lawn during those 2.5, 3 hours. It was the game of the week, which sometimes got higher ratings on a Saturday afternoon in the regular season than some postseason games get now. That's why the Sandberg game landed in a different way. The A's, now in Sacramento temporarily, have a young player named Nick Kurtz. He recently had a game in which he hit 4 home runs and a double. He may have had 6 hits, at least 5. 4 home runs and a double, and the double hit off the top of the fence. Now that's objectively an even better game statistically than Ryne Sandberg in 1984. But it wasn't to the whole country. Maybe somebody's watching it on the highlights on Quick Pitch on MLB Tonight, but it didn't have the same effect nationally. It isn't a signature of Nick Kurtz's career. And his career is just beginning, in fairness. But the point I'm making is it wasn't just what Sandberg did that day. It was everything that surrounded it. The setting, Wrigley Field. They didn't have lights yet, so you knew it was an afternoon game. And as you mentioned, you're in Bloomington Normal right now. That splits the difference between St. Louis and Chicago. The Cubs are playing the Cardinals. It's a natural rivalry. And then the game plays out the way it plays out. You just don't have those elements much anymore in sports.
Do you pinch yourself looking back on the sports moments that you got to witness? Let's just touch base. Derek Jeter's final at bat, Tiger Woods winning the U.S. Open, Jordan's final NBA championship. The player has pressure on them to cross the finish line, but you have the pressure of bringing the action to life in an entirely different manner. Did you feel that pressure of those defining moments?
While it was happening, you're so locked into what's happening. In retrospect, you're happy if what you said holds up. I will say, as you remind me of this, Chicago and number 23 were very good to me by happenstance, Ryne Sandberg and Michael Jordan. I've always had a feeling, sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't get it quite as right, but I've always had a feeling that in a big moment, you're looking not just to call the play if you're the play-by-play guy, but to frame it in some way if it has some historical significance. Now, at the time with the Sandberg game, you just felt like, hey, this is one of the greatest games I've ever seen, and it's a beautiful setting, as I said, at Wrigley Field. But with Jordan, we knew that it could be the end, because Phil Jackson had said throughout the season, he called it The Last Dance, and that's what the documentary many years later was called, The Last Dance. So we knew it was coming, and I said after the shot and after the replay, and Doug Collins and Isaiah Thomas had made their comments, they were showing another replay, and I said, we don't know what's going to unfold in the next several months, but that may have been the last shot Michael Jordan will ever take in the NBA. And if that's the last image of Michael Jordan, and luckily for me, as I was saying that, there was a perfect slow motion shot of it. And just as I finished, the ball passed through the net. If that's the last image of Michael Jordan, how magnificent is it? Now, I hadn't scripted that. Who could know that the game would play out the way it did? That he'd turn a 1-point deficit into a 1-point victory, score 45 points in a game where the final score was 87-86. You couldn't know that in advance. But luckily, what I said in that moment held up pretty well, and I was reminded of that as I watched the Last Dance documentary some 22 years later.
Before I let you go, WJBC is celebrating our 100th anniversary, and you are lucky enough to be married to a former WJBC staffer. Whenever I announce that you are coming on the show, someone always says, he's married to a woman from Bloomington, and she used to work at WJBC. Do you make it to town much to see your wife's family?
They have all moved to Carlsbad, California. Her younger brother and older sister and her mom and dad live in Carlsbad, California, where we spend a lot of time. But don't get back to Bloomington, Normal as often, or is it El Paso? I keep reading Bloomington, Normal, El Paso. It's all kind of together, right?
And we're all one family.
Yeah. And you know, we're still very friendly with Doug Collins, the greatest player in Illinois State history. So there's a connection there, but we don't physically get back there as often as we once did.
Well, as always, I appreciate your time. You are sought after in all aspects of this media world, and after your eulogy to Ryne Sandberg on Friday, I sent you a text on Friday, and I was like, I hope he's not sitting down at the after meal having chicken and pasta with the family, and I'm bugging him about an interview the following Monday, but you were kind enough to reply and respond and make time this morning. I can't thank you enough.
Happy to do it, Scott. Take care.
All right. There he goes. Bob Costas here on WJBC.